Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turon here with another Warhammer Total War online commentary. In this particular ladder battle, I will be piloting the Dwarfs, and I'm facing off against a Greenskin opponent whose forces are definitely vast. He's got quite a wide line of troops there, so it's definitely a very classical orc strategy. So as far as my front line goes, I have a front line of Longbeards. So I have 4 of those. And again, Greenskins do tend to bring some missile units. You know, they can bring Night Goblin Archers, they can bring Orc Arrow Boys, all kinds of stuff. So regardless, the Longbeards with shields are quite good. And even if, your opponent isn't bringing missiles per se, the Longbeards with the shielded and the traditional Longbeards without the great weapons also have a much higher base melee defense. So they tend to last a little bit longer, and I find they are much more efficient at holding the line. So in the secondary line, I have 2 groups of Quarrelers. So again, these are quite good against Greenskins. Greenskins usually aren't very heavily armored with the exception of Black Orcs, and these guys tend to get the job done, in my opinion. So I also have a group of Longbeards here in the back. Again, this is kind of an auxiliary group, and my opponent's forces are quite spread out, so I'm going to have to shift my formation quite a bit to make sure I don't get enveloped. So regardless, this is my auxiliary group that I will use to plug in as needed. And of course, as I always do with the Dwarves, I have a Thane with the double potions. I have Ungrim Iron Fist with the Axe of Dargo, and then I also have a Runesmith with all of the upgrades, including the missile defense. In the back line, I have 2 groups of Slayers. I have been playing quite a few Greenskin players recently who are bringing Giants and Ragnarok Spiders and those type of things, and the Slayers are pretty good against those. And also, I mean, granted, Cavalry can just cycle charge and run them over, but, they do okay against Cavalry, so big fan of them there. As far as my opponent's army, and before I go over there, I also do have 2 gyrocopters with brimstone guns who are going to be able to go over and harass these Black Orcs pretty well. So I was very happy that he didn't have a lot of ranged units in his core army. Over here on the wings, my opponent has Forest Goblin Spider Riders. These guys are pretty solid, and they do apply poison, which is very good. He has 1 group of Wolf Riders as well as Spiders, so good diversity there, and they will apply that poison, and hopefully that'll work out for him. Over here, he has a line of Orc Boys, so just standard Orc Boys. Again, mainly a fodder unit. They are shielded, so they'll be able to take Quarreler fire pretty well, but the Longbeards are definitely a superior infantry, in my opinion. He has 3 groups of Black Orcs, so this is the real power behind his army, so I immediately need to start focusing these troops down with that Grudge Thrower I have over there and make sure to hammer them, because they'll definitely do damage if they can get in against those Longbeards. Then he has a lot of Savage Orcs here. These are a pretty cheap unit, and for what you're paying, as long as they're not taking the brunt of damage, they can actually deal pretty good sustained damage for how cheap they are. So definitely like Savage Orcs. And over here he has Orc Boar Boys, so he actually has a pretty big cavalry force. As in that case, his Orc War Boss is also mounted, so he has a very powerful, potent cavalry force that can probably really push through my ranks and do some serious damage. He also has a Goblin Big Boss on Spider, which is quite good as it can also have the double potion. Then lastly, he has a Night Goblin Shaman, so he has a pretty big army. Definitely, I don't have the front line to necessarily absorb all of it, but thankfully on this map, I'm able to use this terrain here, and I kind of make like a perimeter here and just essentially try and hold the line, which is so good because having to make a full square is really, really tough, and I feel like it's ineffective with the type of units that I brought. So thankfully I was able to use this, and I don't have to worry at all about getting flanked over here. So without further ado, let's get started. So he's advancing everything. He's just pushing here, and I was trying to see where he was sending his units so I could develop my defensive formation, because this isn't what he had such a wide army and so many cavalry. I didn't want to advance out into that and be subject to these cavalry charges. I wanted everything to be really, really tightly knit so that he would have to come in, and then everything would be getting the buffs of my Runesmith, and again, that was kind of the direction I was going. So I do have my Grudge Throwers. They're targeting these Black Orcs over here, and they're doing pretty good damage. And then I also have these Gyrocopters with Brimstone guns shooting at these Black Orcs, and they did just get a kill there, which was nice. And they're going to do pretty decently against them. They are armor piercing. Again, they're very good against anti-large, but they also do have armor piercing capabilities, so they'll do pretty decent damage to these Black Orcs. But unfortunately, he is chasing them with his ranged archers, the Goblin Archers over here. So I'm kind of like just scooting and shooting, just moving, shooting, moving, shooting. And they're doing pretty good damage, and any, value I can get out of these, killing these Black Orcs, I'm very happy with. And another great Grudge Thrower hit right there. So I was very happy about that, because other than these Black Orcs, his army isn't really that high tier of an army. It's mostly a lot of fodder units, and the backbone of his army is in these Black Orcs here. So regardless, I was seeing that, he was shifting most of his forces to the east, so I didn't really have to worry too much about this flank. I just put a group of Longbeards here, I put a group of Slayers here, and I reformed my ranks to face this way, because it was clear he didn't want to come from the low ground, so my opponent was coming up and around, which was definitely a smart play, but it does make him subject to a lot of missile fire, as it is a long walk. So that's something you have to evaluate. Do you want to take the more direct route at the cost of the hill advantage, or do you want to take the wide route, which he, at the end of the day, chose the wide route, which was fine. And, you know, the orc units are pretty quick. I mean, these savage orcs have 37 speed, so they can get up there pretty quick, and unfortunately for him, they are pretty weak to quarreler fire. They have no armor, so it's going to be a little tough on those guys, as those quarreler bolts will eventually start to add up and do some decent damage. So over here, he's continuing to use his missiles to shoot at my gyrocopters, but these gyrocopters are pretty heavily armored. They have 100 armor. So these units, as their tooltip states, are weak against armor, so they'll last quite a long time. So my opponent opens up with Itchy Nuisance, which lowers my weapon damage as well as my melee attack. I wasn't terribly concerned because the main thing I want to keep is the defensive capability, so they can absorb this initial shock. So as you can see, I kind of have a very tight formation here. I have like a square right against the mountain, and he's converging from all angles. So on the front line here, his savage orcs are engaging. But these longbeards, they're designed to hold the line, and I was also able to use the Rune of Oath and Steel and also the damage resistance buff and really make those guys very, very resilient. Over here, the longbeards engage against these savage orcs, and the savage orcs will do a pretty good job at cutting through them. Regardless, I use these slayers and I come around and get a rear flank on those savage orcs, and they're going to get cut to pieces. Over here, these longbeards are able to hold, and I have a really nice perimeter here. You know, where the issue was is he sent his black orcs in here, but that's what you want to do with dwarves. You identify the threat and you send Ungrim to deal with it. That's kind of the best way to roll, in my opinion. So he's going to get in there with his battle axe and cut some black orcs up. So I was definitely happy about that. And the perimeter's holding pretty well, surprisingly. That runesmith, he's right here in the center area, and he's buffing all these troops with his constant buffs. And over here, my slayers did get a rear charge in these savage orcs, and they are shaken now, but my opponent wisely pulled his cavalry, who they're going to be very cost effective against these slayers. But thankfully for me, slayers don't rout, so I wasn't concerned about the morale hit from the rear charge, more so just the losses. But I also pulled my other group of slayers to really support this, because he was trying to collapse this flank with these cavalry, but you know, the orc boar boys aren't very tough, and you know, they're going to be able to get taken down by slayers pretty quickly. And these longbeards, they also held. They have that charge resistance, and that really, really pays off at the end of the day against those type of units. So these quarrelers begin trading fire with his range units. Again, I didn't want to let them get sustained value and just shoot at me all day, so I pulled these guys a little higher up the hill to get a better vantage point, and they're going to turn and shoot. Over here, my opponent's forces are beginning to crumble out here. The one pocket of resistance that he has is this group of black orcs right here. So he has a very, very strong group here. I believe his war boss was nearby, as well as his goblin big boss. So Ungrim was kind of deep in it right now. He's all the way over here, and you know, he's surrounded, but he's still doing a pretty good job for himself. Unfortunately, he does use his goblin big boss to attack him, and he's using the Itchy Nuisance to lower his weapon damage. And right here, I was starting to kind of lose my line a little bit. Over here, my guys were holding their own and doing well, but I was having to use my Thane, my Runesmith, as well as Ungrim to hold this line, as the Orc War Boss is there, and they're beginning to target down Ungrim. And one downside of that is I do not have potions on Ungrim. Thankfully, he won't rout, but regardless, it was still an issue. Over here, I was able to win over here. The Slayers were able to overpower, and as you can see, definitely a massacre down here for the Orc Boar Boys. They really got cut down by those Slayers, and they're able to start converging up the line now. So again, I kind of had a bit of a difficult situation on this northern flank here, but Ungrim and the Thane and the Runesmith were able to hold even when the Longbeards were crushed. And as you can see, these Longbeards only have 18 bodies left here, and they're still fighting. It just goes to show how truly substantial Dwarven leadership is. Even when their troops are like crushed, you know, they'll continue to fight to the death. And you know, at the end of the day, these Quarrelers were still just firing this whole time. The Longbeards did a really good job of holding against those charges, and they're now getting to fire free range into these Black Orcs over here. Back here, I kind of just pulled a group of Slayers and had them chasing down units and kind of trying to keep his reinforcements from coming back, and I wasn't concerned because, again, they're not going to rout. So I'm just having them chase these units down, and they're definitely, you know, going to do pretty well against these Savage Orcs, although you can see units going down on both sides. And I suppose the Savage Orcs, you know, are a decent matchup for these Slayers, but the Slayers are definitely winning this, and they're not going to retreat, unlike these Savage Orcs who are now wavering. So I'm also taking some missile fire here. So the Slayers don't have armor, and unfortunately they're probably going to go down, but at least they're distracting all these units here. As far as this front line goes, these Quarrelers, again, still just firing, and that Runesmith is still just pumping out Rune of Oath and Steel, Rune of Wrath and Rune on his low tier units, and really is just generating value. So he has this Night Goblin Shaman, he has his Goblin Big Boss, and I believe he still has his War Boss over here, who is in pretty good shape. And again, he still has the potions, so he's going to be able to fight for a long time. Unfortunately for him, this Night Goblin Shaman is not having a good time. The Slayers are doing a pretty good job at whittling him down. over here, those poor Slayers. I think there's still a few of them running around. Yeah, there's still 9 Slayers. And I also had my gyrocopters making sure that these units don't come back. So that was definitely working out pretty well for me. So he does get the Orc War Boss and uses the Wa as well as a potion to heal up. And he comes in here and, you know, it was still a little concerning because he had some units coming back from route over here. The Grudge Throwers and the Quarrelers are still online. And I still have a healthy Thane who's at full health. I have a decently, you know, healthy Runesmith. And Ungrim, I believe, is around here somewhere. I'm not sure. I do land those gyrocopters because they did run out of ammo. So figured I might as well get my value out of them and have them go crash into the opponents there. He does get the Goblin Wolf Riders in here, but he probably should have brought those around to hit these Quarrelers. But regardless, Quarrelers can still actually outdo the Goblin Wolf Riders in combat. You know, Goblin Wolf Riders are very cheap units, and the Quarrelers are not pushovers. You know, they have decent weapon strength at 28, pretty decent melee defense, good leadership, and solid armor. So that's something that's very cool about Quarrelers. So I see my opponent is charging up the hill here with some units, so I immediately turn my Quarreler groups to start firing on them. This is definitely well played on my opponent's part. He sends the shielded troops in first, although they did rout, and then the Black Orcs follow up. So the Black Orcs didn't take too much missile fire before getting close, but there they are. Now they're getting peppered. And those Quarrelers are definitely paying their dues. So my opponent notices this, and he pushes his Orc War Boss through to try and tie them up, and he does get them engaged. So, you know, it was definitely unfortunate for me, but I believe I try and pull them back here in a moment, and I do have my Runesmith, as well as some other units engaging there. And I'm not sure where Ungrim went. He may have died somewhere in the fray, because I remember he was very, very low, and he was getting focused by the Goblin Big Boss and all those guys. But regardless, even if you lose your Lord as the Dwarfs, it's not the end of the world like it is with a lot of factions. They're very resilient, and, you know, they'll fight to the end. So we'll go ahead and fast forward here, because this is mainly just his general getting whittled down. So, you know, at this point, it was very close, but those Quarrelers generated a lot of value, and, you know, it just goes to show the Dwarven leadership is just so powerful. You know, a lot of his units routed, and if these units hadn't routed, for example, it might have been a close battle. You know, he still has some Black Orcs in here that could have been very dicey, but, again, at the end of the day, it really came down to the leadership. So it's definitely a fun battle. I really liked using the terrain, and that's definitely one of my favorite maps. I feel like the player who starts off on the high ground, where I started off, has a pretty distinct advantage, and that definitely helped me. For example, if I had started down in the marshes, I would have had a hard time because he had such a wide army. If my western flank had been exposed and hadn't had that mountain to defend it, he would have just come in and gotten a full surround on me, and it would have been a much, much closer battle. So, and he may have even won, who knows. So, again, really good game to Risky. That was a really fun battle. Yeah, and as you guys can see, Ungrim did unfortunately go down there at the end, and that Runesmith just barely held on and was still fighting. So Slayers did quite well. Grudge Thrower did good. Even that Gyrocopter racked up quite a few kills, and a lot of those were Black Orcs. So that was a good value there. And of course, the Longbeards, they did a great job holding the line against those Orc Boar boys. So again, good game. Really appreciate all your support, guys. You know, more content coming soon. I'll try and get more Dwarf games out, and I know I owe you guys some Chaos games, and I don't think I've uploaded more than one Bretonia game, so perhaps I should jump on a few of those, but it's definitely my least favorite faction. Thanks again, guys, and have an excellent night. Take care.